All right, no
And
problem.
then we'll start.
Okay. Is this the first class?
No, this is the third session.
All right, I missed the first two ones then.
So what we'll do is we'll basically just send you the recordings, because all these sessions are recorded. So
All right.
what you can do is actually go to the YouTube channel, and I'll share the link in the chat, and then you can actually go through the recording.
Okay then. Thank you.
All right.
So
This class is 2 days a week, Monday and Tuesday.
So this class is on, Mondays and Tuesdays.
Yeah, 11 to 12.
11 to 12, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty much everybody joining in. That's great. So we'll make a start in a second.
Okay.
Close that window as well. Close that window if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, so let's start, and we're going to start off just with a small video, and this video is going to be hopefully helping us do a quick recap in terms of what we've discussed, so far. So let me just share the screen, and we'll watch a video first. So I think most of us are now aware of what is person-centered approach, because we've been talking about it for the last 2-3 sessions. So the idea thereabouts is that we should know what a person-centered approach primarily means. So let's watch this video. That's great. So I've got a couple more people which have joined in. That's good. And last but not the least, let me press record so that for the benefit of those who would not be able to join the session, they should be able to hopefully, view the recording. So let's start. So just a quick few, housekeeping tips. Keeping in mind that if you are not asking any questions, just to reduce the background noise, if you keep your microphones muted, that'll be great. And if you do step out of the session at any given point in time, the idea would be to try and put that through the chat so we know that you're taking a break. And if you have any questions, you can obviously stop me then and then when we are discussing the topic, and also ask the questions through the chat route. So let's start off with a bit of a video, which I want to show primarily. And this is to look at ensuring that everybody understands, this approach of person-centered care that we've been discussing. So I'll switch over to, the YouTube video. 1 second. We'll be looking at watching this particular video, which basically showcases, the person-centered approach. So let me just play this video, and if you can see this, hear it, please, keep your microphones in the background muted. Thank you.
All of us at some point in our lives will rely on social care, be it for ourselves or for someone we care about. Personalisation ensures that the recipients of support remain central to and in control of the process by which they receive it, so that they can live the life they want to live. One way this can be done is by giving people who use social care the choice and control to become active rather than passive recipients, empowering people to design support packages for themselves or to choose where they want to live. It's about more than just controlling how money is spent. It's about being supported in staying well and recovering quickly from illness. It's about ensuring that everyone has access to public services, from transport and leisure to advice and advocacy. It's about strengthening communities by encouraging inclusion and supporting the relationships that are as vital to the care system as they are to society itself.
Personalisation means for me that I want to be able to stay living in my own home. I want to be able to access every kind of public transport. I guess it's really about the ordinary, to be honest. It's about things that everybody, not everybody, but people choose to do, and what I choose to do is not very different from other people. Thank you very much. Thanks.
If I had to sum up what personal budget's done for us, it's united us. It's kept us together as a family. We were at the point of kind of going into residential care, not because we wanted to expect them, but because it was the only way we were able to function as a family. Being able to allow Hannah to develop as a person, go out on her own and have her own life, it's given me my life back.
Personalisation is about something that when you're well, you don't need to worry about. You're able to dictate that that's the way people treat you when you go into a shop, when you go into a bar, when you meet your friends, when you're having a meal with your family.
At the heart of personalisation is a recognition of the skill and creativity of social care practitioners. With systems designed to make the most of their people skills, they can get back to the reasons they wanted to do the job in the first place, not to fix people's problems, but to empower and enable people to fix them for themselves. Achieving this is no small task. It requires a change of culture, a shift of mindset, a different way of looking at the system. It means empowering social care staff so that they in turn can empower social care users. If we succeed, then everyone will benefit by being part of stronger communities and a more inclusive society.
Personalisation to me is about enabling me to do the things that I took for granted for so long. It's only recognising something essential in human life, which is that everyone is an individual, like it or lump it.
So as you can see, this particular approach of looking at, how care is to be provided to everyone in the society. And I think if you recall the original, the starting words of the video from the author, the original words were that at some given point in your life, you will all require, care. And this will come across to us, from a point of view of delivering health and social care through the route of, the people working within this particular sector. Now, when we look at this particular approach of personalization, we basically get to see this particular unit that we are studying, very nicely going into what is called person-centered approach. And the whole idea of studying this particular unit is to understand one of the core units and the foundation units that you need to understand from a point of view of getting into the health and social care sector. In whatever role that you work as, you would be required to follow these principles of person-centered care, which is these 6 principles that we talk time and again, and we refer to them, from a point of view of ensuring that when the care is delivered, it is delivered keeping in mind these principles, which mean that you are going to be respecting the dignity of the individual. You're going to be giving the individual due care, which is required in terms of respect. You're going to be looking at making sure that the people who are receiving care, their individualization or their data is protected, privacy in terms is maintained, and some of the principles which require you to give, support, which is not going to be, which is going to be undiscriminatory and irrespective of the culture background where they come from. This is going to be made available to the users without doing any discrimination in terms of race, culture, religion, background, beliefs, things like that. Now, there is also a very good article, which I would suggest that, this is something which is going to be available on Moodle. And I'm going to suggest that everyone goes through this particular article for the purposes of additional reading. I'm going to show this on the browser just for now, for the purposes of viewing. This is an article, a small, handout, which is primarily a 10-minute read, and it talks about person-centered care made simple, what everyone needs to know, so that when you are providing this care, you are able to ensure that this care that is being provided, is tailored to the individual, so that the individual is able to make the use of care being provided, and obviously are able to receive it in the manner they want, in the fashion they want, and in the conditions in which it allows them to get better and obviously get back on their feet. Now, this particular article is a structured article. It follows through by talking about what is a person-centered care and the approach. It talks about why is it important, and it also discusses some of the background that we have discussed in terms of how this approach came about, who introduced the terminology, and why has it become so important internationally and across all healthcare systems wherever we go, or whichever healthcare system we study. So in terms of the background, Carl Rogers, introduction by the Institute of Medicine, and then adoption of this particular approach in the NHS in the early 2000s, the Lord Darzai report, and then finally this becoming a part and parcel of the NHS Act of 2010. So this is a good article and a good handout to read in order to understand this unit in a bit of summary. Now, let's go across to, what we're going to be discussing today in terms of the third learning outcome. Now, the third learning outcome that we're going to be looking at on this particular unit, person-centered approach, is going to be focused on, understanding how person-centered care is applied in practice in the health and social care setting. So the video that I also played, was a bit of a precursor for you to understand in which they had shown, what is called a care home, an old age home. And in that, how care is being delivered by various people working within the health and social care professional, as healthcare assistant, as people working within this sector, and how the, personalized care was being applied in terms of making sure that individuals in the care home are able to receive it. You could see people on wheelchair, you could see people being helped in terms of their walking, their food, the basic activities which people are able to do because of this particular support which is provided by healthcare professionals. Now, this particular assessment, learning outcome has 3 assessment criteria. So we'll be looking at the skills required to be able to develop relationships within this job responsibility that you do. If you do become a health and social care assistant or a professional, what are the basic qualities that you would need to have to be able to develop relationships? Because the person who's providing this approach over a point in time is able to build a positive relationship. The person is able to become a confidant. The person is able to understand the individual and the type of care which the individual requires, and obviously tailor it to the requirements so that the person and the person receiving and the person giving the care, there's a bond which exists. Then we also look at, explain how health and social care workers can promote individuals' independence. So here we are going to be revisiting one of the 6 principles wherein we need to talk about that when we deliver this care, we need to make sure that the individual's independence is maintained. The ability to be able to make independent decisions is maintained, and we look at that in the 2nd assessment criteria. The 3rd one basically talks about the situations where health and social care worker need to ensure privacy and dignity of individuals. So what kind of situations can arise wherein the privacy of individuals and dignity of the individuals have to be maintained? Sometimes this means that the health and social care workers need to, revisit some of the basic principles to see how they can pass some bits of information to family, friends, and the members which are close to the patient or the person receiving the care, but at the same time yet maintain the dignity and privacy which is required in terms of delivering that care. And then the 1 merit assessment criteria talks about ethical issues that could be faced while we are applying this approach within this sector. So there is a fair bit of content to be covered, and we look at the presentation, maybe do a bit of discussion during the course of this, the delivery of this particular session, which is covering, the learning outcome 3 talking about how person-centered care approach is applied in practice. So in the first 2 learning outcomes, we basically understood what is the approach. We understood, how this approach came about, and then why certain rules, regulation, and the legislation which has been introduced by the government over the years has become important in terms of making sure that this approach becomes a central core part of every service which is being provided by the health and social care worker. Now, in the 3rd learning outcome, in short, we are going to be looking at, discussing how this is applied. So we are going to be going into the details of how this approach is applied. So not theoretically looking at, but looking at picking up a few principles of the PCA approach and then applying them to certain assessment criteria. Now let's look at some key terminology before I get into it in terms of a bit of understanding. So when one of the key words which came across, in this particular learning outcome is talking about, positive relationships. So one of the assessment criteria talks about explain the skills and personal qualities needed to develop relationships with individuals in this sector. So when we look at relationships, if you look at the meaning of the word relationship, what we mean essentially by that is that you're looking at ways in which 2 or more people can be connected together, or there are common things or practices which connect these people, and it allows them to basically create a bond which gives them confidence to be able to rely on each other or depend on tasks being done over a point in time as the relationship develops. Now, when we talk about adding the word positive relationship to it, what we mean by that is this is a relationship which can be shared between 2 people who can support, encourage, and help each other practically as well as emotionally. Now, this is very important in the case of health and social care, because when we look at, the benefits of how positive relationships can, help individuals to recover or have a speedy recovery if they are undergoing, and receiving, say, for example, certain type of care after the procedure or after operations or clinical procedures, then the attributes of positive relationship, which could be things like kindness, mutual respect, trust, honesty. You're looking at, that you're making the patient feeling that they are valued, the support that you're able to provide, and empathy in terms of being able to, listen to them and understand them, allows, the individuals to recover more quickly from a particular situation. And that is why the importance of positive relationships has been highlighted, within this particular profession as one of the key bits which allows social workers, healthcare workers to be able to, deliver care effectively. Now, when we talk about, environment in which this care is provided. So if you put on your thinking hats now, and you think of a GP surgery, or if you think of a hospital, or you think of an A&E department, what can you visualize or think about in terms of what kind of people work within that location or within that department? So this particular aspect of different sets of people working to be able to deliver and provide this care to individuals who have that need or require that care would be, constituting what is called the health environment. So things like consultant, doctors. If you look at an example, say on a Friday, somebody's got injured, and while having a party out, and they are then required, to call the A&E, and then ambulance picks them up. And at some stage, what will happen at some stage is that when they go to the A&E department, you will essentially be assisted by nurses, or maybe a consultant doctor if it requires surgery or things like that. So if you think on your, put on your thinking hat, what you're going to be able to see is that within that particular setting, when the ambulance picks you up and is able to then provide, and take you to the hospital and is going to be able to provide you care, that would mean that people wouldn't be dealing with nurses, practice nurses. They will be dealing with healthcare assistant, healthcare professional. There would be consultant doctors, practitioners, who would be willingly looking at helping you and to get you in touch with the right person, so that they are able to, obviously provide a solution to which, say, for example, the care needs to be provided. So assuming you had a fall and, you fractured your knee, or your feet, for example, or your foot, and your ankle is, fractured. Obviously, when you report it, the A&E picks you up, takes you to the A&E department, and obviously there's a handover which happens from the ambulance, A&E team, to the hospital team. At some stage, you're brought onto a wheelchair, and then, a doctor or a GP comes in and obviously looks at you. And then in order to get a second opinion, a consultant comes in and looks at whether the fracture would require surgery, or the fracture would require, obviously putting on a plaster, and what kind of, medication would need to be administered in order to alleviate pain that the patient is going through. So the number and the type of different types of people which are going to be looking at providing a solution to you would be constituting what is called the healthcare environment. Now, when we contextualize this particular definition to social care environment, you are going to be looking at professionals and organizations which will provide care. And this care would be maybe care after you've had the plaster and you've been discharged from the hospital. And that would mean that you would need maybe some physiotherapy sessions. You would need somebody to visit you, or, come in and change your dressing or your plaster, and then ensure that you're having your medication, and, the medication is obviously helping you recover, or helping you do a speedy recovery. And in those cases, you would look at people essentially, coming in and, helping you out, maybe even at your home. And in those cases, when you consider that would primarily be, professionals which will be, providing care after you've received the initial treatment at the hospital, and they would constitute what is called the social care environment. Now, let's also look at some of the bits in terms of, going further. When we look at care, there is care which can be provided to various different types of individuals. You have adults, you have children, you have vulnerable adults, vulnerable children, you have people who are having disabilities. So a lot of care needs to be tailored to the type of person, who's going to receive that care. So in specific, when we look at childcare, what is the childcare, and what would constitute the environment in terms of people working within this particular setup to be able to provide care to the children. So here again, you'll have practitioners or organizations which work with children from birth to the age of 13. And in some cases, when you look at people having deliveries, when I say mothers delivering babies during the COVID pandemic, you could possibly see that a lot of mothers actually delivered a baby at home instead of going to the hospital. And this was primarily a preference, keeping in mind to keep pregnant women away, from hospitals in order for them not to contract the COVID virus. So in those cases, the care which was provided by maybe the triage team, consisting of different nurses and people working with the ladies looking at giving birth at home, would constitute what will be the childcare environment. So in this case, this environment will also extend to pre-nursery, nursery schools, wherein sometimes we also, put our children, when you're working, you put them into nursery or childcare, and they would also constitute, this childcare environment. So anything like out-of-school clubs, activity clubs, preschool settings which could be within your own home, would essentially, if you're a carer for your own child, or if you're a carer for an adult in your case, then you'd be looking at providing, environment which is primarily going to constitute social care environment, but one for adults. And if it's children under the age of 13 or people under the age of 13, which is primarily going to be classed as children, that will constitute the childcare environment. Now, one of the other things which comes across as a key word, in the learning outcome and the assessment criteria is that we are looking at what is called, the concept of partnerships. When we talk about the concept of partnerships, now what we talk about here would be, how does the, let's put it this way, let me put it this way, that how do people work together to be able to deliver care to individuals within the sector? So there are lots of government bodies, governmental bodies, there are regulators, there are, community, people in the community, and obviously family members, near dear ones, friends, relatives, who all constitute at some point in time the care system which is required to be put together if somebody is to, receive care. And that would be, they'll have to work in partnership. So when you look at, when we talk about working in partnership, what we mean primarily by that is that we are looking at a group of individuals coming together to be able to work in teams and then deliver care to a set of individuals. So when we talk about partnership, in the health and social care sector, what we could also mean is that private, public bodies or organizations would come together to form a bond or some sort of a working relationship, and that would then be used to provide some sort of service and delivery to the individual. So if we look at, when you register with a GP surgery, there is an interactive relationship between you and the doctor. When you go in and see the GP and you explain the problems, what is happening is there's a bit of a interactive relationship between you and the doctor to be able to explain that what could be the problem, and the doctor then tries to obviously diagnose the problem and then appropriately give you a prescription or medication to be able to solve that issue or that problem that you have. Now, in some cases, if they do feel that this is something that cannot be resolved, then obviously additional tests like X-rays or scans or other bits are also suggested. And in those cases, what will happen is you'd be asked to go and visit maybe a hospital or a particular department to get further scans or treatment done. Now, the benefits of working in partnership include improved experiences for users in terms of social care, and it also reduces or brings down the barriers which are sometimes present in terms of delivering this care to the user. So when we talk about partnerships, an example of this would be that when you look at the health and social care sector, nurses, doctors, midwives, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and others work together with different departments, setups, to be able to provide care to a particular individual. Now, we can't claim that one particular person like a GP or a nurse is providing all the care. No, there are going to be different people interacting, and this would then be a structured response with the team providing a care to the individual. So an example of this would be when you look at doctors, nurses, midwives, different types of people working within this sector coming together to provide care to the individuals. In this case, when I give you an example of, say, maternity, sometimes when you have ladies delivering a baby at home, then in those cases you would see maybe the doctor might not visit, but you'll have a practice nurse, a clinical nurse. If there is a complication, obviously, then the patient is rushed to the A&E, where a consultant or a doctor will look into it. And in some cases, post the delivery, you will have support coming in from a triage of nurses, or the triage of nurses which are going to be responsible for making sure that the mother is sound, safe, and the child is also, safe, and obviously due care is being provided in terms of, clinical care for the mother to recover and for the child to obviously, develop, and obviously things being done. So there are lots of basic aspects of it. And I think some part of it we have experienced ourselves when we have seen this happening within our family or near dear ones undergoing some care or receiving the care. And that is where we see the, practical example or benefits of working in partnership when this particular system works to provide the care required, by the patients, or in this case, by mothers. So when we look at the learning outcome 3, we are looking at how this care is applied. And when we are going to be talking about how care is applied, we are going to be looking at some of the key terms which will be used time and again. And the idea thereabouts was to try and explain some of these terms before we get into the assessment criteria. So I hope this is clear. And if there are any questions up until now, please feel free to ask me now before we get into discussing some of the assessment criteria for this particular learning outcome. Any questions so far? Right. So a silence from you guys means that obviously there are no questions, but if you do think of any while we discuss, you can also type them through the chat room. Now, the first assessment criteria that we need to look at, when we talk about this learning outcome, is explain the skills and qualities which are needed to be able to develop relationship with individuals within the health and social care setting. So this particular word HSC is repeated a number of times. So sometimes when I'm looking at obviously discussing, I'm because we are studying this unit, and this is one of the fundamental units, as I mentioned, or core units for this particular sector. I would try and avoid the use of the word health and social care settings. So yes, we are looking at skills and qualities which are needed to develop relationships with individuals. And obviously the setting that we are discussing it for is not general to business or any other organization. We are discussing it in the context of health and social care. Now, I don't know in terms of, very basics of it, what is a skill? Anybody in terms of what is a skill? Anybody knows or can give me an example? What do you mean by a skill? What do you mean when I say you need to have skills and personal qualities? So what is skill and what is personal qualities? Anybody? Okay. When we talk about skill, what the literal Oxford Dictionary meaning of the word skill is that you have the ability to do something. You are expert in a certain area. So when I say I've got, I can type, 200 words per minute, this is a skill. If I say that I can speak publicly, or public speaking for me, I think is a skill. So sometimes, let me just quickly, mention one bit here, that when you are obviously on the session and you are not muting your microphones, I am taking the liberty of muting you so that the background noise can be reduced. So when you join in, there's no point in joining in again and again the session unless you're being disconnected. But once you're joined, you can unmute and mute your microphone by clicking on your name and on the 3 dots, and it allows you to do that. So let's go back to the discussion where we are having what is a skill. So skill is an ability or an expertise that you have. So I give an example is that I have the ability to type 200 words a minute. Now that is, typing is a skill. Now, if I look at this from a context of health and social care, if I am able to If I've done a certification, for example, in understanding what is person-centered care, that's a skill. So I know the 6 principles of person-centered care, and that I have studied academically, and then after that I've received a certification. That is a skill. So I can work within the sector and I understand what is a person-centered skill. So there could be various different types of skills. Skills can be classified as transferable skills. They can be classified as personal skills, and they could be skills which are knowledge-based skills. Now, sometimes when we refer to them on your CV and you go in for an interview, you do mention that I have transferable skills. And when you say you have transferable skills, that means there are skills or traits, attributes that or experience that you've acquired over the years by working in different job roles, and you're able to transfer them over and apply them to a different job should you be given the opportunity. So these are skills which we term as transferable skills. Things like I can work within a team, I can organize, I can academically write, I can speak publicly. These are transferable skills. Now, there are also what are called personal skills. So when we talk about personal skills, we are talking about traits or skills which are linked to your personality. And these skills could be specific to you because at a point in time they define how you basically look at working within an environment, within a team, within a setup. And they would be skills which could be things like I'm quite patient, I am diplomatic, or I'm result oriented, I'm independent in terms of decision making. And these are personal skills. These are skills that you acquire as you grow from your childhood to becoming an adult, and you are also having experiences which you're going to keep, the good experiences, and they will help shape your personality. We then have what are called knowledge-based skills. Knowledge-based skills are skills wherein, as I mentioned earlier, I've done a certification in the 6 principles of person-centered care, and I've received a certificate, and they will be termed as what are called knowledge-based skills, because that is a skill that you've acquired in a specific area or a specific subject by maybe through training, through learning, through studying, or maybe some sort of on-job experience or apprenticeship, and that would be termed as knowledge-based skills. And these skills could be, like, say, for example, over the years, you've become good with numbers. You're good with accounting. Over the years, you've become a good listener. You over the years, you have worked in different roles, and because of the experience that you've had, in some cases, you have done some courses and gone through some trainings, and obviously attended trainings in the place of your work, and these have given you a CPD certificate or a training certificate, and these are skills that you've acquired, and these would be termed as what are called knowledge-based skills. Now, what are personal qualities? Anybody, in terms of when we say personal qualities, any idea? Because these are very basic in terms, if you understand some of these parts, terms, then essentially it'll allow you to, do the task quite well. So let's look at qualities. Now, personal qualities in particular are characteristics or attributes which basically describe your personality. They are aspects of your identity in terms of things like temperament, your nature, and, your core values which you exhibit while you're dealing with others. And this basically brings out the kind of interaction that you do on a day-to-day basis in your working. Now, when we talk about qualities, obviously, there are different types of qualities. So because it is related to the personal aspect of the individual, what these qualities would be, they would be personal to you. Things like I'm sincere, I'm honest, I'm loyal, I'm truthful, I'm trustworthy, I'm dependable. These are personal qualities. Now, when we look at these personal qualities from a point of view of health and social care, and we look at the skills that you need to be able to work with in this sector, one of the key bits that we are going to see is that you need to be aware of the 6 principles of person-centered care. So that is why this is mentioned. Now, there is also another 6 C's that we need to be looking at. Now, when we look at skills and we look at personal qualities, we look at the 6 C's of communication skills. Now, these 6 C's would essentially allow you to communicate, understand the individuals or people that you're working with and you're responsible for providing care with, and they would be important for your aspect of working within the sector, and they would be termed as skills to a certain extent, because if you're able to communicate effectively with different people across different age groups, for example, you're able to understand children and communicate something in their in their language. If you're able to speak to adults, if you're able to speak to people who have disability, then this is a skill that you have, and you are able to vary your communication when you're able to speak to these individuals accordingly. And if you speak something and the other person on the other side reflects that by nodding the head or by responding back to you as a feedback, then you can say the communication process is also complete, and it helps you effectively put across your viewpoint, which the other person is understanding, and you get to see that by they nodding their head, which is body language. Sometimes they're replying to you, saying, yes, I've understood. And that feedback would basically be, a positive for you, because that shows that you're able to communicate across different age groups and able to do that effectively by transmitting or translating your message that you need to communicate. Now, when we talk about these 6 C's, primarily from a point of view of health and social care, we need to look at these 6 C's which help us exhibit certain behaviors. Now, if I'm a health and social care assistant, or I work as one of the key members within the team as a nurse, midwife, or a care staff, what I want to be able to do is understand what is required in terms of personal skills and qualities. Now, when I talk about these 6 C's, we need to talk about care, compassion, competence. We need to look at communication, courage, and commitment. These are the 6 C's which are required in terms of our personal skills, in terms of skills and personal qualities, to be able to provide effective care or work as a member of the team, to be able to deliver effective care to patients. Whether you're working as a nurse, whether you're working as a midwife or a care staff, healthcare assistant, or a healthcare professional. Now, when we talk about some of these, skills, this is one such part that you need to be able to, exhibit. And these 6 C's that we talk about, are based on, aspects of what is required to be delivered, what is required to be communicated in the health and social care, or in the care sector in particular, when you are delivering or responsible for caring for a particular patient or a person. So care means looking after and providing for the needs of the person. Compassion means you have the awareness to be able to understand the need and desires of others while providing this care. Competence is that you have had enough training and you have skills that are required to be able to effectively perform in your job. And that could also be a combination of knowledge that you have to be able to deliver effective care for those who need it. Communication skills are very important in this sector, because people sometimes, if they are able to speak, if they are bilingual, they are able to speak other languages. You get favored in these kind of jobs and professions, because you can effectively work as a translator while delivering the care. You can understand the person better because you speak their language, you understand their culture, and obviously, communication is a key aspect of it. Courage, you need to be able to have personal strength and vision to be able to do things right. You can't do things, just for the sake of doing it. You have to do things which are considered, to be accurate and factual, and are required to be done in terms of providing that service. We don't look at passing the buck here or kicking the can down the road approach in this sector, because the care is tailored to the individual, and the care needs to be delivered in a particular fashion, which is defined, in the policies and procedures, of, the policies and procedures of, let's say the individual, the organization, and, say, for example, the, setup in which you're working. Now, when we talk about, other skills which are important, or personal qualities, you need to be able to have a skill which is active listening, and then you're able to respond. Now, there are different, ways through which you can actually listen. There is active listening, there is passive listening. Now, when we talk about listening as a process, listening skills are very important within this sector, because you need to have the ability to be able to pay attention to and effectively interpret what other people are saying. And that is where listening skills come in. Now, there are lots of different types of listening skills. And what we need to be able to do in regards to the listening skills is that we are making sure that we are able to pay attention. We are making sure that we are able to provide feedback. We are able to, look at responding appropriately. And those are the bits that need to be, important. Those are the bits which are very important and have to be looked at from a point of view of ensuring that, you are paying attention and you're obviously, listening into the individuals in terms of, and then appropriately responding with the feedback in terms of their requirement. Now, sometimes if I have a conversation with somebody, or if you're in a class and you're having, or if you're in a meeting essentially and you're having a conversation and you have few colleagues which are yawning or looking away or not, or having their own gossips, this can obviously give you an indication that the people are sitting in that meeting, or they do not seem to be interested, and obviously they would create a bit of a distraction when you look at the process of the meeting, or the meeting going through. So in those cases, what we have to do is, at some stage, we have to ensure that we are making sure that you have skills which are required to be able to understand the individual and then appropriately respond. Now, there are lots of different types of listening skills. There is active listening, as I mentioned to you, and there is passive listening. Passive listening is when you're eavesdropping into a conversation, or you're listening, you're basically providing a shoulder to somebody who's actually talking to you. And in those cases, when we look at the process of passive listening, you are essentially, let's say you're basically patiently listening or hearing to the individual without reacting. And in this case, you're allowing the person to speak without interrupting. And then in some cases, you would be looking at paying attention to what the person is asking for, or what the person is basically, referring to, and then react to that person, or maybe appropriately respond. So if you're in a meeting at a work and then someone is talking, and obviously you're paying attention by responding, nodding, and your body language shows that you are tuned into that meeting, then in this case, you're basically passively listening to, say, your boss or a department briefing which is happening. And when we look at active listening, the active listening process is wherein the listener does not just listen, you are basically appropriately responding, and there are visual signs, or there is body language, or there are ways in which you are processing the information that you're receiving, but you're also commenting on, reacting to it, in order to ensure that an appropriate response is done. And this is one of the key skills required, to work within this particular sector. Now, tone of voice. Sometimes, we hear this word, the tone of voice. Do you know what is tone of voice? If anybody, if I say tone of voice, what is tone of voice? Tone of voice is, sometimes when we look at what we are saying, but we're also looking at how you're saying it. And this basically encompasses choice of words that you choose in order for you to be able to convey the information, or convey or say something to the other people or audiences in that room, or in that for example, in that department, or when you are in a meeting. Now, here the tone of voice is basically related to making sure that you are, when you are speaking to patients, when you are obviously trying to provide some feedback to the patient, or if you're listening into the patient, your tone of voice does not need to be authoritative. It needs to be having a tone wherein you're showing that you are caring, you are cheerful, you are basically conversational, and you're not somebody who is just basically being casual and dry in terms of not responding to the individual. So sometimes you would look at, there is a variation in which you speak to your patients, but this tone or variation in your communication tends to be termed as what is called tone of voice. And your tone of voice in this sector does not tend to be generally authoritative. It is more caring, it is more cheerful, it is more conversational, to show that you are calm and quiet, and you are able to understand the individual and their requirements and their needs, and then it generally, promotes the feeling of friendliness between you and the patient who's receiving the care. And this allows the patient to be, able to rely more on you and have more confidence on you in terms of, ensuring that they are able to speak to you more openly about their problems, their issues, so that you are able to then appropriately get other people involved and obviously, get them to, provide the due care or, say, for example, treatment required. Now, one of the other things that you would see is when we talk about skills and personal qualities, you would generally see that people working within the sector also have people skills. Now, people skills are skills which help you essentially, when we talk about people skills, what does it mean? People skills basically means the ability to be able to work with people, communicate with people in a friendly manner. You are therefore, working with them effectively, especially when we look at, related to your abilities in terms of effectiveness, interaction that you do, and how you are able to communicate with them and then get responses from them. So people skills are very important in this particular sector because people working in the sector are generally quite patient. They are able to show empathy. They are able to develop trust. They are flexible in terms of both their working and obviously, in terms of they're not rigid and they're not fixed. So they are flexible in terms of trying the approach which the patient would need to be able to get back or, get well soon. So obviously they have flexibility in terms of their working approaches and are open to adopting new approaches which will help deliver patient-centered care. Obviously, I think one of the clear things that we look at is people, this is something which is generic, people working within any sector, any organization, any discipline. If you have a good sense of humor and you're able to bring out the funny sides of situations, then you're able to basically, break the ice and obviously form relationships much quicker, or bonds, positive bonds much quicker with people, or different sets of people within the team. So a sense of humor is definitely a plus point with people working within this sector. And to a certain extent, you'll also look at people in this particular sector. When we say people skills, they also have honesty and they also have the ability to look at solving problems, because you have good knowledge, you have acquired skills over the years, which could be personal skills, skills that have been acquired by training, which are knowledge-based skills. So what you also have is an ability over the years to be able to use your skills that you have gained in, in work in other places. When I say other places or other job roles, which can be transferred here to solve problems. And in some cases, this also is related to people skills. And then last but not the least, you're also a good negotiator. To a certain extent, when you look at discussing with patients, when you have to give medicine or administer medicine, you have to be a good negotiator, because there are bits and pieces that you cannot compromise on. And obviously, in those cases, the parties, which are the two parties, yourself and the patient, also needs to understand that there are, things which you are responsible for, and there are things which the patient is responsible for. And in those cases, you are able to negotiate, strongly and put your viewpoint across in situations where no compromise can be done, because it is related to patient health and patient safety. So in general, when we talk about, this assessment criteria, we are looking at talking about skills and personal qualities. Skills can be of three different types: personal qualities, which define your personality and the character, your traits and your attributes. And what we need to be able to do is summarize some of the skills which are required for you to work within this particular sector. Now, any questions on the first assessment criteria? Right, let's look at going to the second assessment criteria, which talks about explain how health and social care workers can promote, individual independence. When we talk about, health and social care workers, who are health and social care workers? Can we name some health and social care workers or roles that we have seen or have talked about? Any idea when we talk about health and social care workers, who all does it consist of? Anybody? If you can list a few roles or job roles that we get to see, within when we talk about health and social care workers. Okay, just for, say, reference, when we talk about health and social care worker, what are the various kind of job roles you would be able to take, when you complete this particular course, for example? Now, health and social care workers, or this particular sector can provide very different kind of, job opportunities and roles. And just for example's sake, here, when we talk about roles and health and social care workers in terms of their different roles that they can take within the sector, they include things like an activity worker, a care worker, a personal assistant, a rehabilitation worker, somebody who's a shared carer, somebody who is basically a team leader or in some cases is a registered manager in a particular setup, looking after compliances and regulation and in making sure that they are implemented, policies and procedures are followed. You could be a manager in the setup, which could be a practice manager. It could be a person working within the administration side of things. You could also be a housing support officer. When you look at council housing, you're required to work as a housing support officer because you're required to provide related support and advice to ensure people can get their tenancy and live independently. You could be a volunteer within this sector, volunteer which could primarily be responsible for looking at various sorts of functions or roles within this sector. If you're working with a charity, you're working with a community, you're working with a community-based setup which is providing care to members of the public in a particular area. You could be a social care prescriber, you could be a welfare rights officer, you could be somebody who is, say, for example, a social care worker, somebody who's an occupational therapist. An occupational therapist would be somebody as a person who works within the sector and provides physical, mental, and advice on how to deal with activities when they are, when you're dealing with people with physical, mental, and social disabilities. So that person would be primarily looking at as an occupational therapist, providing physical rehabilitation or with the help of equipment, helping people with physical, mental, and social disabilities to be able to effectively carry out their day-to-day responsibility or day-to-day activities. You could be a nurse, you could be a counselor, somebody who's able to provide emotional support. Sometimes we get to hear in the news that the Metropolitan Police or the Met Department is actually providing the best possible advice to the family. We have seen that in the news a couple of days back. There's a investigation which is happening on the disappearance of a nurse somewhere down southeast, and the investigation and the Metropolitan Police and the Chief Detective have given some statements yesterday that they are providing the best possible support to the members of the family in this tough situation. So they are essentially working as there must be a specialist team which is working and providing counseling, and that could be looking at providing emotional support to people to overcome the for example the bereavement, or in this case the long-term condition if some of them are faced with which does not have a cure. For example, in certain cases, when you look at cancerous, situations or conditions, drug or alcohol abuse, or substance misuse or addiction in this case, and sometimes you need to speak to people who could be counselors, which work within this sector, and they are able to provide the emotional support and advice. And that role would be a counselor. You could have ancillary roles. Sometimes you look at dinner ladies, you look at cooks and assistants, people who work within the hospital canteen or kitchen and obviously make food or provide food. So and you have domestic workers, you have housekeepers, you have, people who work within maintenance. So there are a gambit of people which primarily work within the sector and in different roles to be able to provide, services that could be directly or indirectly related to care services which they are providing. So when we talk about how health and social care worker can promote individual independence, we need to be looking at dipping into what is called the one of the main principles of person-centered care, and that is where we look at active participation. So here the aim of active participation is to support the rights and independence, the individual rights and the independence of the individuals by encouraging them to participate in activities which could, help in planning or creating a care plan for them as an individual, and which would suit their lifestyle, and essentially allow them to take control of it. And that buy-in which happens from the patient or from the individual in terms of they have a say in on their own care plan would be termed as what is called promoting independence and participation from the patient. And when we look at some of the attributes of individual independence and when we classify them, what we mean by that is that you are looking at essentially allowing the individual to have what is called increased participation and say in the planning of the care that they are looking at receiving. And this would be meaning that they are owning some part of their care plan. Now, in some cases, sometimes you look at individuals, they are quite independent, they are quite bold, and they like to do things themselves. So if they are looking at doing things themselves, they are looking at carrying out some of the activities themselves, then in those cases, what you generally see is that if you try and promote independence, from a point of view of, making sure that the individual has a buy-in and has a say, then you are generally going to feel that because the care plan is being owned by the individual and there is a lot of say, you would generally feel that the person, is more involved in the day-to-day operations or settings in terms of how the care is being delivered. So here the independence could also mean you're looking at the preferences, the wishes and the needs of the individual, and that allows the worker to develop a relationship with the patient or the person receiving the care, and in some cases leads to increased activity, both from a point of view of receiving not just the care but receiving it in a way wherein it allows them to come out or go away from the reason why they are receiving the care. And this is all possible because of the fact that we are basically getting the individual involved as far as the individual's ability to participate in the care plan is done. So there is lots which can be discussed when we talk about independence, in terms of person-centered care. So if I briefly go into the core principles of person-centered care, and obviously the 6 that we talk about, in terms of independence in general, is one of them. But when we look at so if I just quickly bring out for the benefit of everyone, the first learning outcome that we discussed, and in which we discussed these 6 principles, one of them being independence. So what we were looking at there was allowing the individuals to do things for themselves, however big or small they are. And this independence does not necessarily mean that we are leaving them completely alone to carry out some of the tasks themselves. But what we are looking at doing is, in this case, are allowing the individual to take time to enable them to be independent. So we are taking care of activities which are going to be able to make them more independent in terms of carrying out these activities themselves. And this independence makes the person receiving the care as if they are in control of their own life, and gives them a sense of self-worth. And this is what is important when we talk about promoting individuals' independence as a health and social care worker, when we are working within the sector to be able to provide care which promotes the aspect of independence with individuals. Now, this particular aspect of promoting the independence with the individuals also means that we are looking at active participation. That means we are looking at encouraging the individual to obviously, one, understand their viewpoint, but also reacting and appropriately responding to their situation. And in some cases, also creating or getting involved in activities which will allow us to have more personalized interactions with them, which gives them more self-confidence and also makes them more self-aware of how they are able to take care of this particular situation, or in any case, a particular situation that may arise in the future. So the importance of independence also relates to the consent that we need to get when they are looking at making decisions. So when a patient looks at making a decision, sometimes what will happen is because you're responsible for the physical and mental well-being of the patient, and you're working as a care worker, in some cases, if the patient tries to make an independent decision, which is the outcome of which cannot be known, then in those cases, you have to also propagate the importance of consent that the individual should be able to take from you. And in some cases, when you give permission, what are the appropriate actions that need to be taken, if they don't go as planned. So in those cases also, we will look at the promotion of independence. We will look at, obviously, promoting and encouraging active participation, which is where the individual essentially looks at participating on a day-to-day basis in certain activities, which will allow them to feel that they are able to carry out these activities themselves, and in terms of their own care. And also, you are in that case passively supporting the recipient, or in this case, the patient who's taking that initiative to be able to, let's say, take care of their own care requirements in the aspect of doing their day-to-day activities. Now, so in terms of this particular assessment criteria that we talk about, which is explaining how health and social care workers can actually promote independence, if you also relate to the video that we spoke about in terms of promoting independence, when we talk about the personalization approach that we saw in the first video, is what also comes in handy, because of the fact that this is something which is required as a care worker, that you need to have to be able to promote. Now, a quick video which I want to look at, also obviously showing in order to make a point with regards to how independence can be promoted, is what I want to play. It's a slightly long video, but what I want to do is obviously play it here so that you're able to correlate to what I've been saying when we look at promoting individuals' independence as far as the the care planning is concerned. So let's look at this particular aspect, wherein I'm going to take it to how personalization can be used to promote independence in care homes. Let's listen in and watch this short video.
Oh, let me take that, Emily. I thought we'd agreed, remember? You were going to wait for the staff came in before you came down? There you are. I like a nice cup of tea in the morning.
Karen, we don't lock the kitchen. The night staff need to get in there.
Oh, well, if you say so, Frank. Just trying to make sure Emily doesn't burn the place down.
The tea again.
Yep, third time this week. The staff are busy trying to get everyone up, and she's, well, oh, you should have seen the place this morning. We all know electricity and water don't mix.
We can't just lock her out.
Yeah, but surely we're here to make sure everyone's safe.
We're not running a prison here, Karen. We're running a home. And when you're at home, you should at least be able to make yourself a cup of tea.
Yeah, but not if...
I'll have a word. See if I can sort it out.
Well, good luck with that.
Have you got a minute, Emily?
I suppose so.
Anything interesting?
Not the brightest in the village.
Oh, sorry, Emily. I've never been much good at crosswords.
I might be getting a bit forgetful in my old age, but the old brain can still work out a clue or two. But you didn't come here to talk about crossword patterns, did you?
No. It's this tea situation.
I like a nice cup of tea in the morning.
I'm sure you do, Emily. But usually the residents wait until the kitchen staff come in and then...
I've always made me own.
Okay. But here, we like to try and make
Idiot.
sure... I beg your pardon?
Not the brightest in the village. Idiot. I, T, I, O, T. Idiot. Usually remote celestial body.
Oh, I'll see you later, Emily.
Meteor.
I agree. This is absolutely a case of health and safety. And whilst Emily is central to all this, we also need to consider all the staff and residents here. You'll see on file that she has shown slight signs of dementia. And let's face it, she is 94. So the stage 1 criteria for a capacity test have already been met. In which case we move on to stage 2. And given Karen's observations, I really don't think Emily can be...
I know it's me that starts this whole thing off, but I was wondering whether there might be another way.
Another way. Past the assessment standard procedure, Karen. And our observations of them. We have to conclude that we can't allow her to keep making tea for us every morning.
Well, I think there is another way. I rang Emily's niece this afternoon.
What?
Consulting family is standard procedure too, isn't it, Frank?
Okay.
Her niece told me that this tea thing has become a bit of a ritual. Apparently it all started when her husband Charlie was alive. She'd get up every morning, make a cup of tea, then take it to him in bed. Then they'd sit and talk about everything over the cup of tea. Then when Charlie died, she just carried on. Well, it seems to me that for Emily, the cup of tea isn't just a cup of tea. It's holding on to a memory of what her life once was. I'm sorry, Frank, I'm not stepping your toes here.
I know. It's easy to lose perspective sometimes, even over a cup of tea. What do you think, George? Well, as far as I'm concerned, if we can work out a best interest scenario which will keep Emily happy and avoid accidents or the fire brigade, then I'll support you.
Thanks.
As you can see in this video, what the healthcare worker is trying to do is trying to be accommodating with the person receiving the care. And although she was a bit closed initially to the concept of Emily being able to make her own tea, but while they have discussed that in the meeting, what they're trying to do is put together a perspective which works for Emily and works, for the care home as well. So here they are going to get in touch with maybe a family member of Emily and try and see if they can, kind of resolve or come to a situation wherein this allows, a solution wherein it does not become a health and safety issue, and at the same time allows Emily to make a cup of tea. So let's quickly listen into the rest of the video, and then we'll go on and complete our discussion today.
Good morning, Emily. How are you?
I like a nice cup of tea in the morning.
I know you do.
Cheers, darling.
So basically, as you can see in this video, what has happened is that they were able to get the point across, and obviously, get her to observe, and obviously, make sure that by changing the electric kettle to a kettle in which the tea could be essentially made, and she could then pour that into her cup, allowed her to be in command and staying independent of how she is able to make the cup of tea in the morning. So these slight variations are required, sometimes to be implemented in order to ensure that, the patient's independence is promoted. And this is done in tandem, in close working with the, care worker who's providing the care. So I put this video across also on the slide so that if you need to refer to it later, it has some key learning points which can obviously be used to bring into your assignment when you do these tasks. Now, let's go across to the third criteria very quickly, which is looking at describe situations where health and social care workers, can ensure privacy and dignity of individuals. So when we talk about privacy and dignity of individuals, here we are again going back to the six, basic principles of, person-centered care. And these 6 or 7 or 8, values that we talk about of person-centered care have 2 of these values, which is, dignity and privacy. So what does dignity mean and what does privacy mean? So what is privacy? Privacy is giving people the space as and when they need it, and in respecting their personal confidential information, which is what they would not want, to share sometimes, or do not want it to be shared openly, or but with restricted number of people. And that would constitute, what is called essentially, privacy. And then when we talk about dignity, dignity is basically, the way we feel that we are respected, and it makes us feel important in society and obviously in our lives. So we are looking at, dignity from a point of view of ensuring that the individual is, cared for in terms of their eating habits, their sleeping, washing, shopping, dying, bathing habits and things like that. And that is where care workers, essentially come in. And, when they look at providing dignity to an individual, they are looking at respecting the importance of, basically it's respecting the patient, and also they value the importance of preserving the individual's way of life, which is what they are willing to address when they look at listening to them patiently, in terms of, not being bogged down by stereotypes and not making assumptions about what the needs of the individual would be when they need to look at providing this care. And in this particular task, we have to look at, how do we ensure that dignity and privacy are not compromised. So when we talk about, dignity and privacy not being compromised, we are essentially looking at, the values which, or basically the day-to-day functions and attributes that we will be taking into account when we deliver care to the, individual. So when we talk about maintaining their privacy and dignity, we are looking at, say, for example, if you're entering their room, there's a bit of a knock that you can do on their room to, sound them that, can I come in? Or, I'm coming in, if it's a doctor or a patient, if they're coming for a normal, round, or, for example, looking, for looking into in terms of, let's say taking a blood pressure or bloods have to be taken, then you normally give them a bit of a knock and make sure that they have enough time to be able to react. And that is respecting an example of respecting their privacy. You're also greeting and speaking to the individual rather than, facial expressions are important. You're looking into them, into the eye, you're looking at talking to them, you're looking at listening to them when they respond back to you. And sometimes you would feel that, in certain situations, in certain cultures, obviously, touching, for example, might be seen as a different aspect, might be seen from a different aspect. So when you touch them, or when you have to obviously say, can I take your blood pressure? Can you move the, can I remove, say, for example, this from your arm? And that is where you're looking at respecting the dignity of the individual, because you're taking permission and you're ensuring that you are sensitizing them in terms of what actions are being taken in order to, obviously provide or, take that blood pressure reading. And then when we look at their individual dignity and privacy being compromised, sometimes, it is a case wherein the patients can feel offended, they can become closed, the relationship or the bond that you've developed over the working with them can break, and this might, take you away, or, take them away from having any confidence in you. And this is why it is very important when we talk about, maintaining the individual's dignity and privacy, specifically related to, the actions that we end up taking when we look at making these choices. So it is always asking the individual. It is also looking at taking into account the personal views, and also ensuring that in certain cases where you are able to take consent and permission before, any medication, treatment, or, certain things like changing of clothes or other bits related to the care aspect of it is, required to be done. So we are taking extra care in terms of discussing things. If you are in an open hall or in an open space, then you're not asking questions which are going to be compromising their privacy. You're looking away when, say, for example, a patient is getting dressed. You maintain a bit of personal space and boundary, and also look at, assisting them when they need your help in terms of, say, for example, going to the toilets or change of clothes if it's, people in the old age home and things like that. And you're, basically confidentiality wise, you're maintaining the information that is shared with you, and that is not being shared with anybody else, because over a point in time when you provide this care, the individual starts to depend on you, and they are confident in sharing some bits of information which they may feel is personal, and they have shared it with you because they've formed a bond. And that privacy needs to be maintained from a point of view of ensuring that personal data, their choices, their religious beliefs, or their personal relationship with family members and things like that are not shared openly without their consent. Now, the last assessment criteria in this particular learning outcome talks about how do we assess the ethical issues involved in, let's say, providing person-centered care. Now, first of all, what I want to do is basically, look at the meaning of the term. What are ethical issues in health and social care? So, first of all, it could be, what is the meaning of ethical issues? So, I don't know in terms of how many of you know, but when we talk about ethical issues, we're talking about circumstances in which, you could have a conflicting situation which could arise because you are, going to, say, for example, do certain things or prescribe certain things which have been done as per the policy and procedure in a care home. And sometimes the patient or the person receiving the care might not consent to, that being there, or, not being, they will not be open to receiving it. And in those cases, you would have maybe ethical issues which might arise. So these could be issues which could pose a dilemma. And that would mean sometimes, you are not very sure in terms of how they need to be handled, or what do you need to do in terms of how do you need to react. And those then tend to be termed as what are called ethical issues. Now, they are basically situations which arise when you have moral standards being challenged. So ethical issues are issues on which could arise when moral standards are being challenged. And ethical issues can happen in any workplace, whether it's health and social care setting, a workplace, business, or an organization, at a shop, in a location, and you're outside in a restaurant. It can arise because of various different kinds of situations. And given the situation that these occur in a particular activity or a scenario and create a conflict, then is when you are required to assess how would you go about dealing with these ethical issues. One such practical ethical issue which I could relate to here would be, say, for example, discrimination and harassment which is happening at workplace. It could be, for example, related to a conflict which arises because of certain choices being made by our employer, or how these services are being delivered in a care home. And these issues then require, sometimes can pose a risk to the organization because they are making the organization non-compliant. And in some cases, they can also have legal ramifications because the actions being done or promoted by the management within a particular setup may not be meeting the regulation which is set by the government. So when we talk about various types of ethical issues in health and social care, we talk about ethical issues which are going to be related to challenging moral standards. So when I say doctor-patient confidentiality is being compromised, when I say access to care is being compromised, when I say that there are issues which could mean that you're sometimes, when you're trying to deliver care, you're trying to balance care with efficiency and effectiveness. You're looking at, for example, issues which could arise when I look at moral standards. Again, when we look at addressing end-of-life issues, like system support systems were supposed to be taken off. And again, it was in the news a couple of weeks back that, obviously the family lost the battle in the court, and the young 12-year-old child, lost his life because he was in a coma. So when we look at these particular issues in terms of how decision-making was done and why, the family was consented, but obviously the court decided that, or the medics decided that, because he wasn't coming out of the coma, and the life treatment support systems could not continue indefinitely. End-of-life issues can pose a bit of moral dilemma or ethical issues. It can challenge the moral standards, as I say, and that would mean an ethical issue. Now, there are lots of different types of ethical issues that we get to read within health and social care sector. These could be issues, again, which are in the news, blood transfusion, which was offered to patients in the early 1970s or late 1970s, led to the some patients developing HIV, hepatitis B, which are chronic conditions. And obviously the government has announced a compensation package of 400 million to be able to deal with this lawsuit. And that's what the investigation has uncovered. Now, these are medical ethical issues. And this is where, obviously, after thorough investigation, it's been found that, yes, there were people at fault, there were decisions which were taken correctly, and that is where they need to be course corrected. So in this case, some of the patients who ended up losing their life, the families of those patients would be offered compensation by the NHS. Now, when we talk about some of these ethical issues, there are lots of these which basically are related to patient privacy and confidentiality. We are looking at, obviously, transmission of diseases. The one that I spoke about in terms of the blood transfusion scandal, which has happened in the late 1970s in the NHS in England, and the government is now after the inquiry, offered compensation would be transmission of, related to a case of transmission of diseases, because blood transfusion led to some patients developing hepatitis B, chronic disease, other types of chronic diseases, which they ended up losing their life. It could be end of life issues, which is where moral dilemma comes in terms of what is to be done and what is not to be done. If you look at the famous Grand Prix driver Michael Schumacher, he had that accident at the ski resort and obviously went into a coma. He was in coma and he was on life support systems for about, I think, if I recall correctly, nearly about 11 months. And when he came out of it, obviously the family decided that they're not going to pull these life support systems. And he successfully made it out of the coma and is now recovered, from that accident. Obviously, he's had amnesia, which is loss of memory, but his family, irrespective of the cost and other decisions and medics and medical advice being offered, they did not decide to terminate or take off the life support systems, and he successfully came out of coma. So when you have these end of life issues, or when patients are incapacitated to make or have the ability to make decisions, then in those cases, sometimes members of the family are asked, and in those cases, this could pose an ethical dilemma or ethical issues in front of the medics and the family in terms of what is to be done and what kind of decision making has to be done. Now, there's a bit of a theory and a background behind in terms of if you have to understand ethical issues and approaches. There are 4 theories which have been discussed over the years, and they've come about, and this is predominantly theoretical, that you need to understand that over the years, a lot of research over the centuries have been done by different philosophers, and different approaches have been put forward. And each of these approaches are now, let's put it this way, 4 of these theories and approaches have now been, widely accepted. And they are the ones that we need to understand from a theoretical point of view to do the assessment of ethical issues involved in applying person-centered approach. So there are 4 theories. We have the consequentialism as one of the theory, deontology, we have principalism, and virtual ethics. Now, each of these are explained on one of the slides, and obviously when these theories were proposed and, what are the basic findings of this theory, and how they have been, or they can be applied when we are looking at, essentially the aspect of understanding ethical issues. Now, what I would also suggest is that we need to be focused on understanding the ethical issues related to health and social care. But for additional reading, you could go into these additional slides to understand what are the ethical theories and what have been, what are widely accepted and now, or over the centuries have been proposed and now widely accepted when we talk about discussing ethical standards, ethical dilemmas, and ethical issues which can arise in general, in different situations. But we are focused on discussing ethical issues primarily, in applying person-centered approach. And these can only, there are lots of different areas, but generally speaking, these are the 4 that we talk about within this sector, wherein they pose a serious, they pose, for example, serious concern. And obviously there are discussions which can happen around these 4 areas, and they would be the ones that you would need to discuss in this particular criteria by taking an example. So ethical issues would consider things like also cultural traditions, personal preferences. It could also look at values, situations and lifestyle, and they would be, posing, say, for example, roadblocks, barriers, which would need to be overcome in terms of applying the person-centered approach. In other terms, you can also say that sometimes these issues can pose challenges, which will limit the way person-centered approach can be applied to individuals receiving care. And what we have to do is discuss any one of them to complete the assessment. So whichever one you are comfortable with, like patient privacy and confidentiality, which is related to the core 8 principles of person-centered care, I would suggest you could pick that up and explain that with an example, and that would help complete the criteria for assessment. Now, there are some bits of additional reading which I put in here as links to the website, which will allow you to understand this particular learning outcome in a bit more detail. And this is for self-study, including the article, which is the PDF, which I've shown earlier, is what I would suggest that you go through to complete and crystallize the understanding on this particular learning outcome of how person-centered approach is applied in a health and social care setting, specifically related to, the UK. And broadly, when you look at some of these articles, they're all focused within the UK and obviously within the NHS, and they would generally be quite helpful for you to increase your knowledge and know-how about how personal care settings, person-centered approach is applied within the health and social care settings. So with this, we come to an end of this particular discussion for Learning Outcome 3, and I'm going to be meeting you next week on Monday to discuss Learning Outcome 4. And then on Tuesday, we'll be discussing the assignment brief as we complete this particular unit, next week. So next week's session is going to be quite important because we're going to be looking at discussing Learning Outcome 4 and obviously discussing on Tuesday the assignment brief. So any questions that you have, please feel free to ask me now. And what we will do is, if there are none, then we can end this particular session and then catch up next week. So any questions so far on this particular session?
Yeah, please, I want you to tell me what the assignment we are going to do on this session, or do we have to wait until we complete the whole session before any assignment can be done?
No, we will be looking at completing the discussion on this unit first.
Okay.
Next week, we will discuss the assignment.
Okay.
Is that okay? So the idea is I want to make sure that we have thoroughly covered this particular unit, and then we will also discuss how to put together the evidence required to complete this particular assignment for this unit.
Okay, thanks. Another question I want to ask, I don't know.
Go ahead.
About the about the literature review, I don't know if I have to do some research. I'm a bit confused about that. I wrote something yesterday asking if I can throw more light about that, about the literature review.
So there is no literature review in this particular unit unless you're confusing this with some other unit. So
not this one, the previous unit.
Will be sent on the email. You can send a question on the email if it is not related to today's session.
Okay.
Okay. No worries. Anybody else with any other questions? Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining this session today, and I will catch up with you next week. Thanks. Take care. Bye.